Hello, welcome to the presentation, Don't Make Me Read, Strategies for Reducing the Need to Read. I'd like to start the presentation with a story about the little intranet page that could. Much like the little engine that could, this was not a very robust page. It had too small graphics. It just used a few colors. It had no HTML form elements. There were no audio-visual elements or significant animations, just a slight fade-in effect. The initial view had about 31 to 50 words and a bullet list with 3 items. There were about 40 lines of jQuery JavaScript code written by a non-programmer just learning jQuery. It kind of looked like this. The interesting thing that happened is we put some feedback mechanism on the page, and about 500 people took the time to provide written feedback. This is a page that's not used that often, maybe once or twice a month, by most of the users. Some of the comments we got back were about the fact that the page was reducing their stress level and increasing their sense of confidence in what they were doing. Others were saying, well, this is nice, I don't have to spend a lot of time reading through instructions, notes, guidelines, and exceptions. The interesting thing is we did a bit of a word analysis on this, on the surveys, and 16 people used the word wow, which is always kind of nice for a user experience designer to see that some people were actually impressed with the page, but it's only 16 of 500. But there were some who said it was awesome, and that's awesome. There were 45. In this age of Facebook likes, we got 92 likes, which is a pretty positive thing. We also had 161 that said the page was easy to use. With only a few words on it, I guess it would be. And there were 191 people who said they loved the page, which is kind of an interesting way of describing your experience with a particular page. And lastly, and most interestingly, there were 1,006 exclamation points. I don't know about you, but I don't tend to use a lot of exclamation marks in writing, and the fact that people did indicated that they had a fairly sort of significant experience with this page. And the analysis of the results showed that that was, for the most part, a very positive experience. So why did this little page have such sort of a strong positive reaction? Well, one of the reasons why we think it might be is because of something that happens in business. In order for people to perform their work, they need a required level of knowledge, and this little graph is a rough indication of the fact that within different domains of business, there are different levels of knowledge that are required. In most situations, the person performing the job, their in-the-head knowledge, the stuff that they have immediately available, rarely sort of matches the required level of knowledge to perform all the tasks on the job. In some cases, if the job is simple, then the in-the-head knowledge might be sufficient. However, so we end up with this knowledge gap. So how do we bridge this gap? Well, there's 4 major strategies that businesses use to bridge the knowledge gap that their employees have. One is training, and the training is essentially raising that level of in-your-head knowledge. One of the downsides of training is that it's expensive to prepare the training. Research has tended to show that the retention rate from training can be as low as 20%. Loss can be fairly great if people don't engage in the activities that reinforce that training immediately after training, and the loss can be substantial if that knowledge is not reinforced. Another strategy is just simply to ask coworkers. This is not always recognized as an official strategy, but it definitely happens in every organization. I think a lot of people recognize that it is the most significant way that we tend to learn how to do our work. It's a relatively inexpensive way of passing on knowledge, although it does sometimes lead to interruptions of people. And one of the downsides is that if your coworker does not have complete knowledge, they are passing on incomplete or even sometimes incorrect knowledge. Another strategy is call centers, and call centers can be expensive to operate. There's the cost of the people to provide that. There's the training that the call center representatives have, but it's a good way to get a quick answer. In most cases, they're correct answers. In some cases, they may not be quite correct. Another strategy that's kind of new with the introduction of intranets that make this a little more easier to do is to read content. And when it comes to reading content, there's probably about the 3 types of content that you would generally find on a business intranet. There's the procedural knowledge, and that's the how do I do this, the step-by-step procedures. Procedural knowledge is something that people are generally comfortable in reading because they don't necessarily read everything at once. They perform a step, they check it off or whatever. Another type is explanations. This is where maybe a subject matter expert gets into a little bit of detail about why or how these procedures came to be in place. Quite often we find that people aren't that interested in the explanation. They're more interested in how do I get the work done, and explanations may in fact tend to clutter the information that people need to perform their work. Another area is something called rules, and these are really the rules kind of govern when and how to do certain things. So as part of getting to the procedures, very often we have to know, how is it that I decide which procedure I need? Rules can be kind of difficult. They kind of look like Greek. They require a lot of attention to detail because they actually, are often kind of written as, well, if you have this, do this, but if you also have this, do something else. Otherwise, do something here. So a person has to kind of read a complete set of rules in order to determine, given their situation, specifically what set of rules they need to follow, because you're not just looking for the rule that covers you, you're eliminating the rules that don't cover your particular situation. One of the things that rules kind of lead to is this whole issue of cognitive load. A recent study found that cognitive load can be kind of significant, particularly if we are asking people to make a lot of decisions or to do a lot of reading of complex material. They actually get tired after a while and reach a point where they're either not comprehending or they're not making good decisions, or they just simply back out and say, I can't do this anymore. So for businesses, being aware of sort of the return on the cognitive load that they are asking their employees to embark on can be significant. And by this I mean if there is a business process governed by a set of rules that's infrequently performed, very often an employee is going to have to reread or recomprehend those rules multiple sets of time. And it doesn't always make sense to have that kind of process in place because it can get to be fairly expensive when that happens. So what's the solution? Well, part of the solution is to ask questions within your content. And when you think about it, if you go to a fellow employee or you go to a call center, the first thing they're going to do is ask you a question. So, what's your situation? What do you have? What do you need? Those are the kinds of things that then lead them to a point where they can say, well, this is then what you need to do given what your goal is. So, but some people think that, that's hard to do. You need, artificial intelligence, you need a Watson, you need to be able to do forward chaining logic and backward chaining logic and all this stuff that requires a programmer, with coding and all those kinds of things. Well, as it turns out, it's really not that hard to do. If you have a set of rules that closely follow or can be laid out in a decision tree like this, where one answer leads to another question that leads to another possible set of questions, whether it's just two answers or multiple answers that eventually lead to this is what I need to do, then it can be relatively straightforward to put this in a web page. Now, this is not an exact replication, but this is somewhat what the little page that could, the little intranet page that could, actually looks like. So the first, what a person first sees is the question and what the possible answers to that question are. Selecting one then displays the next question in the list. Now you'll notice that within each set of questions there's also a not sure. How do I find a model number, or how do I find those settings? That's content that would enable a person to find the answer to the particular questions. Now there's even a no script solution for building this kind of set of questions that lead somebody to an answer. It's fairly simple and straightforward. All it does is use target links that are separated by either a div tag or p tag that has a height that will essentially only show one set of questions at a time. So you can see in the code example here, we're asking where would you like to be today. You have three choices. Their href points to the name of a target link further down the page. When somebody clicks St. Louis, for example, they would see then what place in St. Louis, and they got the three choices there, and then clicking that may lead them to something to even further. Okay, this is good training. So at the beginning of the presentation, I promised that I would talk about two different strategies for reducing the need to read. Very often we recognize that reading is about reading text, or sentences, prose, but we also in our business life read a lot of data. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about the concept of the infographic application, that a way of reading and interpreting and acting on data. And to start that, I'd like to tell a little story about a recent incident about 2 weeks ago when my wife was booking a flight from St. Louis to Savannah. So so she put in the information and got a page that looked like this. As a matter of fact, it wasn't quite as good looking as this page. The kayak site is quite well designed.